Hi everyone, this is the new video about the poem Genetics. So, as the title suggests, this is going to be a poem about what you inherit through your genetics. Okay, so it's about a speaker. We don't know whether it's male or female, but the poet is a female, although I don't know why, but in my mind I read the speaker with a male voice. Okay, but it's about the speaker reflecting on what they've inherited from their parents. Okay, so stanza 1. My father's in my fingers, but my mother's in my palms. I lift them up and look at them with pleasure. I know my parents made me by my hands. So first of all, in the opening line, what's quite interesting is this comma here that divides the clause about the father and the clause about the mother. So it physically separates the two in the opening line to show the kind of separation between the speaker's father and mother. But it's not a gloomy tone to this poem. There's a positive tone to this poem, and we get that with the words lift and pleasure, for example. So the verb to lift, when we think about lifting something up, raising something up, it's got those powerful and positive connotations. You know, when we think about religious terminology, when things are lifted up, they are elevated, they are praised, they are worshipped. So the speaker is clearly embracing the idea that they are the product of their parents. They lift up their hands and rejoice in the fact that they can see both the influence of their father and their mother in their hands. And that's very clearly just demonstrated with that word pleasure. So they are proud of that fact, they enjoy that fact, they embrace it. I know my parents made me by my hands. Got the very definitive language here with the statement, I know. The speaker is very, very confident, very, very certain that their parents made them by their hands. They can tell by looking at their hands that they are the product of their parents. Their fingers look like their fathers, their palms look like their mothers. But I think there's also something else interesting about the by my hands, because for me, it makes me think of the expression made by hand. And usually when something is made by hand, it is made with care and attention and love, and this sort of idea of craftsmanship and things having value. So there's lots of different ways that you can take that. I suppose one thing is about how valuable and miraculous and remarkable we are as human beings, that actually the human body in itself is a work of art. And then there's an interesting juxtaposition, I suppose, between that expression of being a work of art and the kind of scientific title of this poem, Genetics. But it could also allude to the idea that perhaps the speaker is trying to reflect on that when their parents were together and married and in love, that, you know, they were raised with care and love and attention, and it was their loving relationship which resulted in them, essentially. So there's different interpretations that you can take there. Okay, so as always, I will upload the PowerPoint to the portal where you will see all the detailed notes about that, and you can add that to your copies of the poem. Okay, moving on to the second stanza though, straight away we get a shift. We've gone from the personal pronouns in the first poem to now a they, and there's a clear difference. They may have been repelled to separate lands, to separate hemispheres, may sleep with other lovers, but in me they touch where fingers link to palms. So we do have this contrasting and conflicting tone, the idea of the parents separating, in fact living in separate hemispheres. There's a great big distance between them. But in the final line of this stanza, it connects the idea, though, that despite the separation, despite the physical separation between the parents and probably the emotional distance between the parents as well, the speaker is testament to their once loving relationship. In me, in them, you can still see the signs of that previous love, because, as I said, when the speaker looks at his hands, the fingers remind them of his father, and the palms remind them of his mother. We've got, as I said, the repetition of the word separate, so that emphasizes how the parents are now separated. They are physically far apart and emotionally far apart, you suspect as well. But interesting is this use of the word repelled. Now, because we've got this language of science in the title, genetics. When I read the poem, first of all, and I read the word repelled, it made me think of learning science when I was in school, and we learned about magnetism, we learned about how like poles repel. So if something is too similar, if magnets are the same, they will repel. They don't attract each other, they push each other away. And so maybe if you're taking that meaning and the poet has deliberately chosen a word that also has a scientific meaning to suggest that perhaps the parents were just too similar, that their personalities clashed, and that's why they ended up not staying married to each other, because of those clashes in personality. So you could take the meaning of repelled in that kind of scientific sense, that perhaps the parents were too like each other for the relationship to last and be successful. However, obviously, you've also got the other meaning of the word repelled. The more common meaning to be repelled by something is to be disgusted by something. So perhaps then a sadder, more bleak image of the parents no longer liking each other, being disgusted by each other. Perhaps there's more sinister reasons for their separation. But for me personally, I think it's much more that idea of the language of science, the idea of them being repelled, physically being forced apart, perhaps. But up to you what you think. Interested to know what you think about that repelled as well. Which interpretation do you think is most likely? Okay, that idea then of the separation continues, and that slightly sad tone continues with the use of "with nothing left." There is nothing left of the relationship, although there's an irony there, because of course this whole poem is about what is left. What is left is the speaker, is the offspring of that relationship. So, deliberately draws our attention to the idea that yes, actually there is something left of this relationship. There's something remarkable left about this relationship. There's a human being. But there is an emptiness in that expression, with nothing left. There's nothing left of that relationship in a legal sense, perhaps. With nothing left of their togetherness, but. So it goes on to exemplify that there is nothing left but friends. So suggestion that perhaps they're not, there's no animosity between them, they do still get on as friends, but friends who quarry for their image by a river. Now I think the use of the verb quarry is really interesting, because the things that we quarry in this world are things that are really important, vital resources. We'd quarry for stone, you might quarry for precious minerals. So it suggests perhaps that this image of when the parents are looking back on their relationship in this metaphor idea of quarrying for their image, that they're looking for something special, looking for something important. So it reflects on how important and special the relationship once was. But I suppose interestingly, it's an image that they're looking for. So that alludes to the idea that it isn't a reality, that they are, maybe like lots of the other poems here, we've got this idea of nostalgia. And when you look back at something, it often looks more spectacular and more wonderful than it actually was. And this is the image that they look for. It's not the reality. It's perhaps how they remember things. But again, we got that contrast with the word river. Rivers and water especially is kind of seen as a source of life, and it's full of energy and vitality. So that could be alluding to what the relationship was like as well. Water is sacred, it's special, it's life-giving. So again, that could link to kind of how important the relationship once was. So different ways, again, to kind of look at the language there and to interpret it. But I thought a very clever metaphor to quarry for an image. Quarrying, it's useful, it's important, it's special. At least I know they're married by my hands. So again, that I know comes through the certainty, the confidence of the speaker. They know that they're a product of their parents' once love. Perhaps they can't find it right now, they can't remember it distinctly, but the speaker knows that they are proof of a union. Because it goes back to the idea of the hands, the central image of this poem, that the speaker's hands remind them of both their mother and their father. They can see the genetics of both of them in their own hands. Okay, and then the image of the hands, which is prevalent throughout the entire poem here. We've got the speaker, I shape a chapel where a steeple stands. So it's almost like they're putting their hands together to form the shape of a chapel, and the fingers pointing upwards being the steeple. And that imagery is deliberate by the writer, because obviously it makes us think about the marriage and the union that the parents of the speaker once had. And when I turn it over, my father's by my fingers, my mother's by my palms. So once they've moved their hands from this position to this position, they turn it over, they're reminded again of the fact that they are the product of their parents, that they can see their fingers like their father's, their palms like their mother's. But again, I think interesting and deliberate, this choice of turning it over. For me, and it's just personal interpretation, it reminds me of the expression to turn over a new leaf. And it perhaps suggests that there isn't any animosity from the speaker about their parents separating. When they turn it over, the other side of their marriage, what results from their marriage is them. They're on the other side of the marriage. But then the poet continues with the idea of playing around with that image of the marriage, and when the speaker is looking at their hands, they're imagining their parents getting married in the past. They use the poet uses the adjective demure, and demure can often mean kind of modest or shy. Perhaps it suggests that their wedding was modest, it was a small, quiet affair, or maybe it suggests that the speaker's mother and father were still a little bit shy of each other. Maybe it alludes to the idea that they got married quite young, perhaps, and that could be a possible reason why it didn't last, that they had this naivety, perhaps. Or it's just that delicate, soft idea that the speaker has of their parents' marriage, perhaps. Demure before a priest reciting psalms, so we get the idea just of that marriage. But then back to this definitive language. My body is their marriage register. So very, very confident, very, very decisive. My body is. The speaker is absolutely firm in their idea that they are the product of their parents. And again, see it as a proud moment. They are the evidence of a relationship. They are the proof of a relationship. So they are the metaphoric embodiment of the marriage. I reenact their wedding with my hands. So just the playful image of the speaker imagining their parents getting married and remembering that quite fondly and with love. However, we do have an end stop at the end of all of these three lines, which kind of suggests that they are very separate things, that marriage has ended. And so it's very, very separate to the offspring, the body in this line here. And then when it returns to the image, again, it's separate, okay? And then the final stanza, again, open to interpretation. I'm really, really interested in hearing your interpretation. But what is clear is this shift. So take me with you, because we have for the first time in this poem, we have the introduction of direct mode of address with the pronoun you, as if perhaps the poet or the speaker is speaking directly to you, to us, the reader. So take me with you. So if we take that interpretation that it's a direct mode of address, it's to us, the reader, take me with you. What is it that the poet wants us to take with us? Is it the idea in this poem that we are all the products of our parents? Is that the idea that the poet wants us to take with us and wants us to be proud of that inheritance, perhaps, and embrace it and enjoy it? Is that the idea? Or alternatively, perhaps the you is not us. Perhaps the you is another character in the poem. Perhaps the speaker is speaking to their lover, and this is a request: take me with you. Let's reproduce. Let's create offspring who are the image of ourselves. Is it that idea that's in the poem? So take me with you. Take up the skin's demands for mirroring in bodies of the future. So if we take the second interpretation, that the speaker is speaking to their lover, then the speaker seems to desire to want to reflect themselves, mirror in the bodies of the future, wants their son or their daughter to have some of their qualities, just as they have from their parents, which is what this poem is about. I'll bequeath my fingers if you bequeath your palms. So I'll leave them my fingers, you'll leave them your palms. Maybe that's why I think it's a male narrator, because it was the father that was the fingers and it was the mother that was the palms. Maybe that's where I get that idea from. I'll bequeath my fingers, so I'll give them my fingers to inherit, you give them your palm to inherit. We know our parents make us by our hands, so that could be that definitive. And now it's a we. The I know has become we know. So it could be the speaker is talking to their lover, and therefore we know our parents make us by our hands. This is the legacy that we can leave. We can give part of ourselves to our children. However, if we go back to that direct mode of address interpretation, that the poet is speaking directly to us, then we can look at it another way. And the if, for me, again, this is all my personal interpretation. I'm really interested in hearing yours, or you reading around it and seeing what other people have said about this poem. But the if here, I'll do this if you do this. For me, that's the idea that we as a society are in this together, and it is all of our responsibility to leave the world in a better place. And I will leave this if you leave this. And perhaps the poet is asking us to leave the best of ourselves in the world. And then the idea of we and us and our, that it's our collective responsibility. But even if it's not that idea, another idea is that one thing we all have in common in this world is that we are all the products of our parents. We all inherit genetics from our parents. So it's just perhaps the idea that this poem moves from a singular experience to that collective acknowledgement that we all know our parents make us by our hands, perhaps. So as I said, interested in hearing your interpretations. Mine is probably a bit more clear in the write-up that will be on the PowerPoint that you can access from the portal. But that, in a nutshell, is genetics. Hope you enjoyed.